All right. Thanks so much, everyone, for tuning in today. I'm sure more folks will join us as we get rolling here, but I want to kick us off on this webinar. So, my name is Annie Chester. I'm the Policy Director at American Bird Conservancy. ABC works to conserve wild birds and their habitats, and that includes by addressing threats like bird collisions, which we will be talking about today. And we're specifically going to be focusing on how policy change can really reduce that threat. So I'm really excited to introduce our presenters here in a second. But before we get there, I just want to make a few housekeeping notes. This webinar is being recorded. We will share a recording of the presentation with any registrants. So if you know someone who couldn't make it, they will get it, you will get it. We want to make sure this is an accessible resource for everyone. There is also captioning available for today's event, so please use that if that's needed. We also encourage you to ask the speakers any questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of the screens. We'll reserve answering those questions for the end of the presentation, so both presenters will go and then we'll answer the Q&A, but please feel free to drop in your questions at any point during the presentation, and we will do our best to answer all of those. So, without further ado, I want to introduce our presenters for today. We have first up Dr. Christine Shepard, who is the Senior Director of the Glass Collisions Program at ABC. Chris joined ABC back in 2009 after a career first as the curator of birds at the Bronx Zoo, where she was exposed to glass as a threat to birds on a daily basis. Since then, Chris realized that science alone is not enough to solve collisions, and policy is crucial. Um, After Chris, we'll hear from Caitlin Parkins, who is the Glass Collisions Program Coordinator. Caitlin works to reduce bird window collisions through education, research, and policy. Caitlin helps lead national and local advocacy efforts, partnering with individuals, institutions, and lawmakers to help develop and pass bird-friendly building legislation. So you're going to hear from two very excellent presenters here. But before I turn it over to Chris, I did really want to highlight that ABC is an excellent resource on all things collisions, and you'll really get that through this presentation, I hope. But I really want to direct you to our website. We have a great landing page regarding glass collisions where you can learn more about the issue. The other great thing for anyone in the policymaking space is we have a really great section of the website dedicated to bird-friendly buildings and how you can make that possible with policy. So I will drop these links in the chat here, but really wanted to highlight that before we got started here. With that, I will stop sharing my screen and I will turn it over to Chris.
Thanks, Annie. So I'm going to provide a bit of background about the collisions issue, and then Caitlin will take over and talk about some of our policy work. I know I don't have to tell people in this audience why birds are important. There are many, many reasons, starting with their intrinsic value, um, including the billions of dollars they contribute to agriculture and other ecological services. But for this audience in particular, at least 96 million Americans call themselves bird watchers. So birds have a strong constituency. That's a lot of votes. Pretty much everyone has heard a bird hit a window or seen a bird hit a window, but most people think that that's a rare event. But imagine how many times it has to happen for everyone to have experienced that. We believe that over 1 billion birds are killed every year just in the United States. So the global toll is much, much higher. In North America, the majority of birds that are killed this way are songbirds, warblers, sparrows, thrushes. And most of these are night migrants. This is a little bit confusing because most collisions happen during the day, but that nighttime migration is also very important. You might think if a billion birds are being killed that you would see them all over the place. And there are a number of reasons that you don't. People sweep them up. Early in the morning, people come out and sweep the sidewalks. Birds can bounce into foundation plantings and disappear. They can flutter off. And unfortunately, most of the time when they do fly off, they are injured and die later. But the primary reason we don't see carcasses all over the place is scavengers. Everything from crows to cats to rats to possums to raccoons. They all think that a dead bird or even a not quite yet dead bird is a tasty snack. And they will actually stake out windows where lots of collisions take place. There's a tendency to believe that collisions are associated with skyscrapers, which is actually sort of backwards. One reason for this is that there are very few skyscrapers in the world compared to buildings of other heights. The Smithsonian did a meta-analysis that was published in 2014, and their numbers showed that almost half collisions took place on homes and other structures up to about 3 stories. Most of the rest of these collisions take place on buildings up to 11 floors. Now, there's a really good reason for this. That's the bird activity zone. Birds tend to be found in vegetation from the ground up to the treetops. This is a lot like most car accidents happening within 20 miles of home because that's where you do all your driving. So most of these collisions take place where the birds are. And that's true for high-rise buildings as well. Most collisions, but not all, on high-rise buildings take place in those lower floors. So what is a bird-friendly building? The building on the left is a classic example of a not bird-friendly building. You can see those reflections. You can't tell the real trees from the reflected trees. I do a lot of work with architects, and I know when I walk into the room, they think that that image on the right is what I'm going to be trying to get them to do. Well, that is bird-friendly architecture, but luckily for all of us, almost any kind of architecture can be bird-friendly. So here's a bird-friendly home. All of the windows on this house have external insect screens, and that's all you need. If you want a bird-friendly glass box, that's possible. The Intuit headquarters in Mountainville, which does have a requirement for bird-friendly design. With this building, they went with a glass that has a narrow horizontal stripe embedded in it, which is very effective. This is another strategy. This is a Cayuga Health building, and their strategy was simply to use materials that don't reflect much. So there are lots and lots of different ways that you can do bird-friendly design, and it's very adaptable. It helps to understand the issue a bit better if you just know a little bit about the differences between avian vision and human vision. We're primates, so we've got eyes in the middle of our faces. They're quite close together. We don't have to deal with a beak between them. And we have overlapping visual fields. That gives us three-dimensional vision or depth perception. Now look at the birds. Birds have eyes on the opposite sides of their heads. So imagine seeing something different with each eye. It's really hard to do. Birds don't have a lot of depth perception. They use completely different mechanisms to figure out where they are in space and how fast they're moving. And of course, they do have to contend with the beak. Birds can see many more colors than we can. Some birds can actually see into the ultraviolet, but not all of them. Some birds can perceive the Earth's magnetic field. This is how those nighttime migrants navigate. The one area in which humans have better vision than birds is something called contrast sensitivity. If we're standing in the same place, what to us might look like a field of dots, to birds could look just like a blur. We're better at being able to discriminate objects at a distance. People also have a tendency to believe that they can see glass, whereas in fact, neither birds nor people can see glass. We learn about glass when we're very small. We begin to understand it as a concept, and we know where to expect it. We know that it can be a transparent solid. So if you look on the left, a row of decals like that tells us that there's a glass wall there, there's a glass door there. That doesn't work for birds. They don't understand glass. They never understand it as a concept. So to them, those decals are simply obstacles they could fly above or below. And if I take away the cues that you use, you can't tell me if this is a picture of a tree seen through a glass window, or a reflection of a tree. Now I give you a little bit more information. You know there's glass here, but you still don't know if it's a see-through situation or a reflection. When I show you this, you know it's a reflection. Birds don't understand that right angles are not part of nature the way we do. They do not understand any of the cues that tell us that these are not real trees, and that is the primary cause of collisions. Birds take what they see literally. So to a bird, any of the trees that you see in this image is a potential destination for food or for shelter or for perching. And birds will sometimes try to fly through glass to get to things on the other side, like the plants in this atrium or even the sky through a couple of different layers of glass here. Compounding this problem is lighting at night. I mentioned that many of the birds that are collision victims migrate at night. They migrate between their breeding grounds in the north and their wintering grounds in the south and back again. So twice a year, they're running the gauntlet of the entire country. And birds are attracted to light. This can be as simple as a slight change in direction, or it can be as significant as birds circling in a powerful beam of light, unable to break away. Over the years, this has become a more and more serious problem as we have more and more light pollution. So as birds come in range of a city like Houston here, they are sucked into the built environment where they come in contact with glass. People in Houston and in other cities are trying to combat this problem by turning lights out during migration. And this can reduce attraction, but even if cities were completely black, birds would still land there because cities tend to be built on areas that birds use as stopover habitat. When we first started looking into this issue, the people that were doing the monitoring were bird lovers, not scientists. They were people that were trying to document that there was a problem, and they were trying to rescue the birds that were just injured. We've only seen science around this issue in the last maybe 15 years. And what we've shown over and over again is the more glass on a facade and the bigger the pieces of glass, the more collisions you get. Although birds have been known to strike panes of glass that are even 4 inches square. So this is a big problem because more and more glass is being put into our environment every day. We've also shown over and over again this connection between glass that reflects vegetation and glass that has a lot of bird collisions. Another thing that turns out to be very important is that we discovered birds know their body size very well. They know their wingspan. They know how wide their bodies are when their wings are close to their bodies. Birds fly through complicated habitats all the time. Some birds actually nest in knotholes. So birds will fly through small spaces if they can, like that swallow on the right. Birds also often fly toward open sky, towards blue sky, towards white clouds, towards gray fog. In a condition like that, they're not necessarily focused on what's ahead of them as much as they are looking in all directions, to what's to the side, to what's behind them. Is there food? Is there a predator? Now, if birds are flying through cluttered habitats like the one on the right, you can bet that their attention is definitely focused forwards. They're interested in whether or not they can fly through the gaps in front of them or whether they need to avoid them. And that's very important for stopping collisions. We try to basically convince birds that they are flying not towards an unobstructed area, but through a cluttered habitat. And we do this by putting patterns on glass. There are things to remember about patterns that will work and patterns that won't. Because of that size of their bodies, um, the pattern elements that you use shouldn't be spaced more than 2 inches apart. Luckily, if we find a pattern that works for small birds, it also works for large birds. So ideally, we want to use patterns that will work for the smallest bird in our country, which is the ruby-throated hummingbird on the East Coast, obviously. It's important that your patterns contrast with the glass. They have to show up for birds to see them. The pattern elements have to be of a reasonable size so birds can see them in time to change direction. If you use lines, 1/8 of an inch wide is enough. If you're using dots, a 1/4 inch diameter is what we recommend. Now, obviously, you can have combinations of dots and stripes, and you can have other different kinds of patterns, including random patterns. But this really summarizes the guidelines. Another thing that you have to keep in mind is that patterns will be most visible where on the outside surface of the glass. Modern glass is very complicated. There can be multiple panes of glass mounted with spacing between them, and people put coatings and patterns on any of these surfaces. They will show up much, much better if you choose the outside surface of the glass. And this is an example. Here we have black, gray, and white stripes that have been put on a piece of glass that's reflecting the building behind it. So we're not looking through that glass. We're looking at glass with a reflection on it. And then we have black, gray, and white stripes on the inside surface of the glass. And you can see that gray stripe is basically invisible. The black and white stripes do show up, but not nearly as well as when they're on the outside surface. It's taken quite a long time for glass manufacturers, especially in the US, to become willing to put bird-friendly patterns on the outside surface of glass. But that is something that we're now seeing more and more, which is important. One thing that American Bird Conservancy has been doing over the last decade and a half is developing a rating program for glass. When I first started, the recommendations that we gave to architects and other people interested in making buildings bird friendly sort of went: increase visual noise on the facade. Don't use large expanses of glass. Well, architects want to know how big is large and what in the world is visual noise. We identified a protocol that had been developed in Austria. It's this contraption that you see pictured here that we call a tunnel. And it was devised specifically to help people identify bird-friendly glass. We have been testing glass for 15 years now. And we've gone from a situation where architects had to choose from probably less than a dozen options to hundreds of different types of glass now being available. So it's much, much, much easier now than it used to be to build bird-friendly buildings. Now, how does this work? This tunnel is at a banding station, the Foreman's Branch Bird Observatory at Washington College. They net birds in spring and fall and weigh and measure them for scientific information. And some of the birds that they net come out to the tunnel, and we use a sleeve to put them into the tunnel, which is dark inside. That's here. Once inside, they look down the tunnel and they see two options for getting out. One of them is an apparently unobstructed area. The other is the pattern that we're testing. So in this case, we've got a horizontal stripe pattern on the right and what looks like an open area on the left. What you don't see is that there's a fine net strung across the end of the tunnel. So no bird ever actually hits the glass. We run about between 80 and 100 birds for every material that we test. And we look at the number of birds that fly toward the pattern or toward the control. We use the percentage of birds that fly toward the pattern to create what we call a threat factor. It is an index that gives you some idea of how effective that glass is, and it's simply that percentage. If we fly 100 birds and 20 of them fly toward the pattern, that pattern has a threat factor of 20. And this is what it looks like. The bird's thinking, there goes the bird, it lands on the net, and that's it. We open the door and we let the bird out, and it flies away. So that threat factor number is important. Architects are used to working with rated materials. Low threat factors are good. We have decided that a threat factor of 30 is what we allow as the maximum for something to be called bird friendly. We believe that that will reduce collisions by at least 50%. Now, this is a very low bar. But the goal is to have as many buildings as possible use bird-friendly materials. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Caitlin.
Thank you, Chris. All right, let me share my screen.
I gotta stop.
Yeah. All right, so thanks so much, Chris. Presumably everyone can see my screen. I will take it from here. And I'll be talking more about policy. So the group that we have here, this audience, I know I probably don't need to make the case to you all that policy is often the best way to affect change long-term and across large scales. We do work with individual buildings. We do retrofits, consult on retrofits on individual bird killing buildings. We consult with architects, developers, designers to help them build new bird-friendly buildings. But every time we do that, the process is very time and labor intensive. Some buildings, it might take 3 years of work to get one bird-friendly building on the landscape. And so if we want to make change across large scales, if we want to save, 1 billion birds a year, policy is really the way forward to do that. So I'm going to go through sort of the current policy landscape, the key elements of strong bird-friendly building policies, some case studies of successful policies that have been passed in 2 locations in the US, some strategic framing, how to make the case for this sort of policy, and then the tools and resources that are available to you. So the very first mandatory bird-friendly building policies came about in 2008 and then 2011. In 2008, in Cook County, Illinois, legislation was passed that applied to new construction and renovations, and it stated that those buildings should follow bird-friendly principles. So like Chris said, these were very non-specific. There were no guidelines as to what a bird-friendly material even was, and it exempted the city of Chicago entirely, which you can imagine is a fairly bad, if you will, building for city for birds. In San Francisco, in California, in 2011, there was a policy passed that applied to new buildings and additions and renovations that are near essentially an urban bird refuge or green space, or have a clear line of sight to one. And it exempted many residential buildings. And both of these were really groundbreaking in a lot of ways, but they were sort of the bare minimum. But they really set the stage for what was to come. And so since then, we've come a long way. We now have 28 either states, counties, or cities with mandatory bird-friendly building requirements. There are many more that do have voluntary guidelines, but we do find that those guidelines are rarely followed, and so making them mandatory is quite important. A lot of these have proliferated in about the last 5 years since New York City passed their bird-friendly building legislation, which I'll delve a little bit deeper into shortly. But you can really see how the policies here tend to be grouped near each other. They proliferate in kind of the same areas. I actually had to stop adding pins around San Francisco and California because it just became a mess. So there are even more policies there. And they often are duplicates of one another. So cities may take, the exact same language from a nearby city, and they're sort of duplicated unchanged over time, which can be good because you know a city nearby you has done this, you know that it is applicable, that it works there, but it also results in sort of the duplication of policies that are maybe not as strong or don't go as far as they should. And I'll go a little bit more into what I mean by that shortly. So here's a list of the states, cities, and counties that have mandatory bird-friendly building ordinances currently. And cities really are leading the way with these policies. Some of the strongest pieces of legislation regarding bird-friendly design are in cities. This is the cover page from a publication that we worked on with Yale University. It includes 5 really detailed case studies of 5 cities that were able to pass legislation and how they did it. A lot of interviews were conducted, and so I'll provide links to this as a resource. And states also have done a lot. They set a really good precedent for additional policies to come about within cities in the state. Of course, state policies typically only apply to state-owned buildings within the state, but it really does kind of set a great example. So I'd love to see some more states come on board. But we do also have federal action as well. The Federal Bird Safe Buildings Act mandates that federal buildings, it mandates them to incorporate bird-friendly strategies and practices to reduce bird mortality. This has been introduced multiple times over the last 10 years, most recently on May 8th, 2025. And the primary sponsor of this is Representative Griffith, with the co-sponsor Representative Quigley. And I point this out because birds, this is a great example of how birds really can be bipartisan. So we have both a Democrat and a Republican House sponsor. Both of these representatives really care about birds, really care about the environment, and see this as a great way forward for birds. So these are 2 quotes, one from Representative Quigley and one from Representative Griffith. And I'll let y'all read this if you'd like, but I wanted to highlight that both of them really care about this issue, and both highlight in their quotes that this is a cost-neutral bill. It'll have little to no impact on the budget, but lots of benefits for birds. And I think this really helps draw bipartisan support of these sorts of bills, because if you incorporate bird-friendly design strategies from the beginning, doesn't always need to be a full glass replacement. You can reduce the amount of glass, the exposure of glass, and design in a way that will help keep birds safe while not adding costs. And bird-friendly materials can cost more than what you might consider regular glass, but often it is only a fraction of a % of the overall budget of the building. So just a great example of bipartisan support. And ABC does have action alerts available, and that you can go and support this bill, or if you have a constituency, if you're, maybe a representative of a nonprofit organization, you can send those to your constituency to help get more support for this bill. And I'm sure Annie can probably provide more information on that, or a direct link. Several federal agencies have also been taking on bird-friendly building initiatives. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is really leading the way on this. They aim to eliminate bird collisions at their facilities by 2031. They've created a national collisions team and did a national building survey. It was piloted, I believe in the northeastern region. And essentially, they inventoried their buildings, identified priorities for retrofits, and the national team has been working with all Fish and Wildlife Facilities staff to try to get retrofits in place. They've also demonstrated a considerable commitment to additional education and outreach. They've been that's public outreach and outreach to other agencies within the government. And Fish and Wildlife Service is a really great convener of people. And so they convened the multi-sector summit to address light pollution and bird collisions. And I have no concept of time. I think this happened in the spring of 2024. I don't remember exactly when it was, but it was essentially a big conference of agencies and organizations and stakeholders, lighting industry professionals, architects, all kinds of folks who might have a stake in this, bringing those people together. And from that summit came the creation of the Bird Collision Prevention Alliance, which is a large coalition of many different organizations, agencies, industry professionals who are working together to help prevent collisions. And if you're interested, and if your organization is interested in joining, please reach out to us and we can connect you and get you on board with the Alliance. But not just Fish and Wildlife Service, there's also been considerable effort from National Park Service and USGS. National Park Service has been evaluating NPS facilities and installing retrofits at a couple of places, including sort of high-profile installs at places like Zion National Park. This is a informational window cling that they made to put on their retrofitted windows so that people could learn more about bird collisions and how to prevent them. They also partnered with us at ABC to create a retrofit handbook, essentially an informational handbook of all of the different retrofit options available and how to install them and how to get your hands on them, how they work. And then USGS has also been doing retrofits at their facilities, and they're also a member of the Bird Collision Prevention Alliance. So we're really seeing a lot of support across the federal government, despite the fact that we have yet to get legislation passed at the federal level. So what makes a good bird-friendly building policy? A couple of things here, and this comes back to sort of the duplication and the replication of maybe not strong policies. So we really want to provide some resources and information about how to start strong here. First, you need to define the applicability. So voluntary guidelines are great, but they take a lot of effort to create and include, and then often just do not get used. So we always emphasize mandatory requirements. You have to define what type of building these policies apply to. Ideally, you want it to apply to as many types of buildings as possible because, like Chris said, collisions happen at all different types of buildings, and even at tall buildings, they happen mostly on the lower floors. And so you also can address building height in your bill, so we don't necessarily need to require bird-friendly materials for the entire height of a very tall building. You can include just sort of the lower floors, but we really, want to include as many building types as possible. Many of the bills that are out right now, or that are in existence right now, do exempt residential, and we know that about 50% of all collisions happen at single family residences. And so working towards being able to include these in our policies is really important. We, of course, want to include buildings that are doing nature renovations, and we recommend not including proximity to green space at all because birds move around. Birds are attracted into high-density urban areas by light. They aren't always just present where there is a park. They might be in your street trees. They might be drawn in by light to a completely sort of landscape desert. And so including proximity to green space is not recommended. And we see this a lot because that's what San Francisco did first. And so this has been replicated over time. And if we want to improve our policies, we really need to kind of eliminate that and make them apply across the board everywhere. We want second references to strong material standards. So you'll need to define what bird-friendly material is. And Chris did a great job of explaining what ABC threat factor is. We recommend including the American Bird Conservancy threat factor, a requirement of at least a 30. There are also municipalities that have gone for a 25 instead of a 30, which is a stronger standard. You can also duplicate something like the LEED standard for bird-friendly buildings, although there is a little bit of funkiness around the fact that LEED does change over time. And so you want to make sure you're referencing sort of the best LEED standard that is available to you. And we just really want to emphasize this point because there are other standards that include, for example, dot sizes that are smaller than what birds can see because, again, they aren't able to distinguish. They have lower contrast sensitivity than we do. And so we don't want to be including standards in our policies that allow for things that birds can't see. If you're going to require buildings to be bird friendly, we want to make sure those requirements are really doing the job because there's no point in taking the time and effort and money to make a building bird friendly if it is in fact not. It's important to emphasize bird hazards. Things like skywalks, railings, green roofs, and other attractants are really important to be bird friendly no matter where they occur on and around a building. And so if your policy requires bird friendly materials to only 50 feet, you can sort of amend that and strengthen it by making sure that these hazards are bird friendly no matter where they're found. And of course, we always want to include education and support in our policies. Fact sheets and technical guides are always really helpful in educating folks about how these things can be put into place. I've seen a lot of really nice looking fact sheets and sort of implementation guides come out of a few municipalities recently. And so I can certainly share links to those. But I think a lot of the fear around implementing bird-friendly design is a lack of understanding, thinking that it's really hard to do, that there aren't very many options, that it'll make your building ugly. And so providing really strong technical support and education, we can help make bird-friendly design a little less scary. ABC does have a model ordinance, and we highly recommend starting with our model. Our model is the 100, 100, 100 model, 100% of buildings, 100% bird-friendly materials to 100 feet up on the building. Fairly simple. We do have a model language that also includes all the definitions you need. And again, I know I've seen stuck on this point, but if it was passed as it stands, our model ordinance would be the strongest piece of bird-friendly building legislation passed in the US to date. And so it's really important to start with something quite strong, and then you can work it back and walk back and compromise from there. Whereas if you start with something that is maybe a little less strong, but it's been done near you, you might end up compromising it back a little further. And then the next municipality goes a little further. And then down the line, we get bird-friendly ordinances that really aren't doing what we need them to. So we highly recommend starting with our model ordinance, with that language, reaching out to us. We're happy to help with that language so that we can, really start strong and then find something that works for your district, for your municipality. It's also important to address lighting. We always recommend Dark Sky International for the best resources on lighting. This is their 5 principles for outdoor lighting. We want it to be useful, targeted, low level, controlled, and we want to make sure the color is towards the warmer side. Doing all of these things will both help birds and help people. And you can include lighting requirements, site lighting requirements in your bird-friendly buildings bill. Things like requiring down shielding, reducing the amount of light that's transmitted through windows at night, requiring the use of automatic dimmers, timers, and motion sensors, disallowing uplighting and other vanity lighting on buildings, and including a requirement for curfews for non-essential lighting. So for example, non-essential lights might need to be out by, say, 11 p.m. All of these things are very useful and will help birds, but full standalone lighting ordinances are the ideal. And Dark Sky International has template policies with all of the technical definitions. We see a lot of lighting policies or sections being included in bird-friendly policies and legislation that they don't have accurate definitions, they aren't specific enough, and they aren't enforceable. And so we highly recommend, if you're going to include lighting, to go look at Dark Sky's templates to get really good, strong language that is truly enforceable, and considering pairing your bird-friendly buildings bill with a full dark sky lighting policy, and those things together will help birds and significantly help people and other wildlife as well. So just to highlight some successful policies that have been passed, I already mentioned New York City's Local Law 15. It was passed in December 2019. There was a big advocacy effort led by NYC Bird Alliance and other wildlife conservation, animal rights organizations that are local. They set up council meetings. They used their monitoring data, some of which was pictured here, to create visuals, to create maps. They had big postcard writing pushes. So there's a lot of on-the-ground local advocacy for this bill. And they also did a really good job of doing proactive outreach to the industry, to stakeholders. They were able to get support from architects and from CEOs. This is the Jacob K. Javits Convention Center. It was a bird-friendly success story, and the CEO, Alan Steele, advocated for INT 1482, which became Local Law 15 of 2020, because the Javits Center had such success in becoming a bird-friendly building. He really helped, I think, maybe change some minds that were maybe otherwise skeptical. So it was great to have that support. They also got testimony and bill text input from the Bird Safe Buildings Alliance, and American Bird Conservancy was very involved in the writing of this bill to kind of get the language correct. And it requires 90% bird-friendly glass to 75 feet, every single building, even single-family residential. It includes glass replacement, and this really spurred innovation and the expansion of the bird-friendly materials market. And we saw, once New York City did it, it was sort of, if New York City can do it, anyone can do it. And this is when we saw a real it got the ball rolling. We saw sort of this snowball effect where more and more ordinances continue to be passed, starting with Local Law 15 of 2020. I also want to highlight Lake County, Illinois, which is more recent. Lake County began meeting with local advocates in the American Bird Conservancy, our colleague Brian Lenz, to really start the focus on county buildings. They developed a survey, they sent it out to county staff, they were able to determine hotspots and priorities, but they also really found that people cared deeply about the collisions issue. And in June 2024, they adopted an ordinance that applied to commercial buildings, new construction, retrofits, and things like that. Very similar to what we've seen passed in other places. But what Lake County did was take this further, and in May 2025, they passed the first bird-friendly building ordinance that was solely focused on new residential construction, including single-family homes. And windows that don't have full external window screens will require an approved retrofit or the use of an exterior shading system or bird-friendly glass. And the hope is really that we start getting more options for bird-friendly homes moving forward. And this slide was actually supposed to be way up at the front before I looked at talked about the key elements of bird safe building policy, but it's okay. We can highlight it again now. The goals of this policy are really to address the hazards that we know are a problem for birds, light and glass, while also balancing sort of development and growth and innovation, supporting the proliferation of housing, which can be an issue in a lot of places, preserving building aesthetics and function, while still integrating bird safe design and promoting long-term sustainability by really thinking through sort of responsible building and responsible materials use. And we can achieve that by, reducing the amount and exposure of glass, using bird-friendly glass, focusing on the lower floors, and including renovations. And sorry that slide was out of order, but hopefully it's still useful. And finally, I just want to touch on some strategic framing. Some people still think of collisions as sort of an animal rights issue or sort of a fringe issue, but it might be helpful to look at it from a different perspective. Like Chris said, birds are an ecological and economic resource. They're very important to people beyond just we appreciate birds. But a lot of people do appreciate birds. So there's a lot of public support for bird-friendly design. Birders, bird watchers, and people who appreciate nature and birds are a huge constituency. Um, it is feasible in terms of cost. Bird safe materials cost only marginally more, and it can often be integrated into green building certifications and combined with other sustainable materials. So you can have both solar control and bird friendly in the same material, and integrate those things together. And if you do this from the very beginning of project design, it really can be cost neutral. And finally, it's good to position this as something that aligns with broader goals, including sustainability, environmental justice, green infrastructure, and biodiversity action plans, which are the goals of many of municipalities already. So bird-friendly design just fits right in with it. So we have a lot of resources and tools available to you. I'm going to drop a bunch of links into the chat with links to our model ordinance, the report we did with Yale. We have a list of existing ordinances along with commentary about what is strong and what could be improved in all of them. We have our solutions handbook, and we have a policy toolkit that's downloadable that includes sort of all of our information compiled in one place. And of course, it's always important to engage with the local community. Local Audubon chapters and Ornithological Society chapters might have collisions data that they've already compiled. They have a constituency that are ready to advocate for this. Architecture firms are a great resource. We can also connect you with architects that are very well versed and can speak technically and very confidently about bird-friendly design. And of course, local colleges and universities. A lot of this work is already happening at the campus level, and so they're a great resource to take it one step further. And with that, there's my email address. A shortcut to our website is birdsmartglass.org, and I think we still have some time for questions. So thanks so much.
Awesome, Caitlin. Thanks so much for that. And we do have time for questions. So I see Chris rejoined us here. Yeah, I feel like every time I listen to the two of you present, I learn about more resources. So appreciate all your work. But I want to start with that kind of resource question. Someone earlier in the presentation asked about the United Facilities criteria, which DoD uses to guide design. Is there anyone in like any alliances or conservation groups familiar with this or working to make any recommendations or
No.
engaging with DoD?
We'd
No.
love to engage with DoD. We've worked with the GSA, and they do have bird-friendly policies in their internal construction policies. But DoD and NIH, they all have their own building programs, and we'd love to make those connections.
Yeah, and I will just add one thing, which is there was a DoD lighting bill that was introduced last session. Representative Shariel of New Jersey led on that bill at the federal level. So there is awareness in Congress of this issue, but I think to Chris's point, we need more people working on this. We need more engagement there. Um, Another question we received was, do any states or city provide financial incentives to building owners to assist in retrofitting problematic buildings?
Not to my knowledge. Chris, do you? No.
No,
And that's something I think we are really interested in exploring further. And would, if anyone has some expertise in this area, is sort of developing tax incentives. I know there is one bill that was introduced into the New York State legislature at some point in the last year or so that is a tax incentive for retrofit, but I don't believe that that has moved forward at all. So that's one way that we can maybe address this from a financial incentive perspective.
new construction can be cost neutral, but retrofits always cost money. So the new construction has been literally the low hanging fruit, even though it's not terribly easy.
Yeah, definitely retrofitting is not cheap. I see there's two questions about two specific localities, so maybe we can just keep these brief, but someone did ask why was Chicago not included and what's going on kind of right now in Chicago. And then someone else asked about Florida, if there's anything going on in Florida.
Chris, maybe you know better than I do, but my guess is Cook County exempted Chicago because at the time it seemed just
There's no
unfeasible.
way they could do it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they just said, didn't think that was possible. But there is a policy push in Chicago happening currently. A lot of you probably heard about McCormick Place and the massive scale of bird deaths that happened and its subsequent really successful retrofit. And so I think that has really captured the attention of folks in Chicago. And so we're hoping to see something come out of Chicago shortly. And we and other groups are working on that currently.
Yeah, and then
Florida.
anything going on in Florida.
nothing specific. I mean, there is definite interest in this issue in Florida. And people are retrofitting buildings and so forth, but I have not seen any legislation proposed anywhere in Florida at this point.
Yeah, there is
It's a tough landscape.
there's a really active group in Jacksonville that I think got and the word is escaping me, maybe a lighting deck proclamation, I think, in Jacksonville. And they are really, really working hard there, but so far, nothing to my knowledge has been introduced.
Yeah, I'll also just add Florida-wise, sea turtle conservation is obviously a really big issue down there, and
Right.
lighting really impacts sea turtles. So I think there could be some really unique partnerships. And I know there's some existing partnerships around that, but more to be done in Florida. So area of opportunity for all the Florida residents. Another question we received is, I'm wondering if there is any study that looks into birds flying into solar panels on solar farms. Yeah, how does maybe solar energy play into bird collisions?
I am
That's
not.
another really good question. Unfortunately, most solar farms are private. Um, so it's been difficult to get monitoring. We know that birds sometimes land on solar panels the way they do on highways. So water birds, like grebes and so forth, and then they can't get off. So there are definitely collisions. There are people interested in working on that. But it's in its infancy relative to collisions with buildings.
Yeah, thanks for that, Chris. Someone else asked, it seems there's a disproportional amount of need in the northeastern US. Is there a sense of whether the collision risk and the need is that much higher compared to other regions, or kind of what's going on there, if you have any insight on that?
Yeah, there certainly are places where birds are more likely to collide during migration based on where the birds are moving through, although that can change depending on weather and other factors. So essentially, where there are the most birds, there's likely to be the most collisions. But a lot of that is also just because that's where a lot of the work is being done. That's where organizations have formed and been monitoring and raising the alarm. We're starting to see more groups in the middle of the country and out west doing more monitoring. And for example, in the Pacific Northwest, a lot of their collisions are actually not happening during migration. They're happening during the winter to species like varied thrush and evening grosbeak. And so I think a lot of it is who's looking for birds, who's raising the alarm, who's paying attention, and that's where we're seeing the most work being done. But that collisions happen anywhere that there are both buildings and birds. And so the need is sort of everywhere.
Yeah, definitely. So someone asked, how do you kind of gain momentum? I know you touched on this, Caitlin, like your local bird groups can be a useful resource. Someone said, they've tried to work through their neighborhood association. Is there any kind of other groups people can tap into? Obviously we have city government, we have maybe some other environmental groups. I don't know if you have any examples or kind of insight into that.
Yeah. The local Audubon chapters are typically some of the strongest advocates for this sort of legislation that I've seen. Chris, do you have any other?
No, I agree.
Yeah.
There are often student groups on universities. We're seeing an awful lot of activity there. Um, but you can start with Boy Scout troops. Um, and they should be doing merit badges on this because it gets the parents involved. Some of the most persuasive testimony for New York City was when they had school kids come in. They were monitors for the New York City Bird Alliance. And, they had these kids talking about how much it meant to them to see these dead birds. Um, so anybody getting involved can help.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, thinking creatively about who else you can activate in your local community is such a specialized question to your area. So just encourage you to think about other allies, sometimes unlikely allies that you might be able to find. Um, so thanks for that question though. Very complicated. So I see Caitlin is answering some clarifying questions in the chat. I don't know, Caitlin, if you wanted to say anything.
Yeah, I was actually just about to answer the question that asked in areas that have ordinances in place, is the retrofit part mandated? Typically, no. All of these bills that currently exist only apply to new construction or if significant renovations or glass replacement are taking place. There are no mandatory retrofit bills so far. And that is definitely a possibility in the future. It's just a little more difficult to address because retrofits can be extremely expensive depending on the building. It just has to be approached with sort of not caution, but just we need to be thoughtful about how it's approached. So most of these bills do not require retrofits, or none of them do, I should say.
Yeah.
Thanks for clarifying that. That's helpful. We're getting close to time here, so I want to end it kind of on a fun question and just ask what has been the most interesting bird-friendly building or glass product both of you have encountered? That could be a fun decal or just, yeah, a really cool glass product.
I'm really excited by, I think I know what Chris is going to say, so I'll say something else, but I'm very excited by sort of the solar control films that are now also bird friendly that have recently come on the market, just because climate and, glass is not a very efficient material. And so if we can kill two birds with one stone, so to speak, and be both bird friendly and reduce our heating and cooling costs, I just think that's spectacular. And I really am excited to see those.
I've been working with a company in California that has developed a transparent photovoltaic glass. And we're going to be testing bird-friendly versions of that this fall. So it's the same thing. If you can have glass that produces energy and is bird-friendly at the same time, that's a real winner.
Yeah, those were great examples to highlight because I think sometimes people forget, preventing collisions is also innovative and can be very exciting. Just to liven up policy because I know sometimes it can seem like a dry topic, but really appreciate your answers. Really appreciate all the attendees joining us today. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to the collisions team. They're a great resource. So. We will make sure to share the recording with anyone and just thank you for your time today. Have a good one.